everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and you made me watch Akira, or rather Caleb did. Thanks a lot to Caleb, who is one of our patrons. And this is a movie that I have been really remiss in never watching, just like Ghost of the Shell. I didn't finally get to that until Eric made me watch it, and now I'm doing what I think of as kind of a companion piece with Akira. Of course, both of those animes are really influential, and I'm familiar with a lot of the iconography, and I knew a tiny bit about the ideas of this movie, but really nice to finally sit down and watch it. Really enjoyed this movie. Right away, I'll give it, of course, a green sign flip. This is an absolute masterpiece of an anime. This was at the time the most expensive anime ever made, and you can certainly see it on screen. This thing has got everything. It's thought-provoking, it's got a really interesting allegory, it's got fantastic animation, it's got brilliant action set pieces, it's got a really unique flavor all its own. It's twisted and weird, just like Ghost in the Shell. This was a movie that turned my stomach a little bit in the best way possible. Like, I've been talking a lot lately about how I feel desensitized now in a way that I never used to be. That 10 years ago, there are things that I couldn't watch that I have no problem getting through now. And I'm not saying that it was hard to watch Akira, like I was turning away constantly, but there's stuff that is intended to be shocking that I think 30 plus years later is absolutely still shocking. And that's pretty impressive. It's not shock for the sake of shock, it's that way for a reason. And considering how influential this movie is and how many things have copied it, and not just with the bike stuff, but like I would think that a lot of the kind of body horror stuff, which I was surprised to see here, I didn't realize how much of that was in this movie that I would have seen more of exactly this in other things, and it's really unique and difficult to exactly extrapolate and recreate, precisely. So the idea with Akira, if you've never seen it, and spoiler alert, I will spoil things with this, but Akira is about I assumed that the protagonist of the movie is Akira, and it's not. Akira is until, I don't know, half an hour before the end of the movie, almost like the Matrix, where it's like, what is it? I don't know what Akira is. And then later on in the film, you find out that Akira is a character who is worshipped as unto a god, and at first I think is just a made-up character that like people in this dystopian future are latching onto and assuming exists, but maybe doesn't, or maybe is on some other plane of existence or something. And it turns out that Akira, or Akira, as it's more accurately pronounced in the movie. I watched this dubbed, by the way. I usually like to watch animes subtitled more often, just to get more of the authentic, unique experience, but a movie this popular, usually the dub is pretty good, and so I did go ahead and watch it that way this time, and I did like the dub quite a bit. But anyway, so Akira is how it's actually pronounced. I've been pronouncing it Akira forever. Most people do pronounce it that way, and there's a character in Virtual Fighter who is kind of the big main character in that game, who is called Akira, or maybe it is supposed to be Akira, but I've always pronounced it Akira. So I actually have had reason to say that a lot, and then I watched this movie and find out it's actually not pronounced that way, and that was kind of a shock to me. But anyway, so Akira is actually the initial catalyst for the destruction of Tokyo, and it is rebuilt into the far-flung future of last year, 2019, into Neo Tokyo. And I feel like I've seen Neo Tokyo in a lot of other Japanese futuristic sci-fi things, and I don't know if this is the first thing to call it that or not, but it seems like a lot of cyberpunk things follow suit with that, and unless that's just my imagination, but I'm pretty sure I've seen Neo Tokyo before. But anyway, so Akira is a guy who had ESP abilities and was experimented on by the government to take his powers to the extreme, to the nines. And the government felt like they needed to control Akira so that they could use his power for what they felt like was the greater good, and also probably so that they felt safe around him and that he couldn't take over or kill them or something. And the themes in this, of course, are things that we'll see continue to perpetuate decades after the fact in a lot of science fiction things. These are all things that I've talked about before and other things, but usually things after this. This is one of the big cyberpunk pioneers, I think. This comes out around a lot of other big cyberpunk things. Blade Runner is right around the same time, and it's something was in the air and all over the world apparently in the 80s. You had so many of these dystopian stories, not all just set in the future. Watchmen also fits into this category, like that come out right around this same time, that are about urban upheaval and about civil unrest and about fascist governments that are oppressing a culture, and these kind of anti-establishment things that are about characters who just want to be left well enough alone. They don't want the government to tell them what to do. And it's about anarchy and the and society unraveling, and just individuals trying to be individuals under an oppressive state, and while a country is completely falling apart. And so that's what you have with this, and it's about a biker gang that is just kind of going about their business while, again, society is unraveling, and there are a bunch of protests everywhere against the government. They're unhappy with the not especially fleshed out or discussed tax reform. Everybody's really upset about that, and you've got kind of a military state. I like that it's called it's like the self-defense army or something like that. It's very George Orwell. It's very 1984, where we doublespeak. We say one thing, but we actually mean something else. And anyway, so Akira was, like I said, experimented on, and this is a thing that we find out about later. It opens with a flashback where we just see a singularity. We see this big shockwave that destroys the city, and I assumed it was a bomb, especially because there's mentions of World War III, I think, and I don't really know what that's about, but I assumed it was just a big nuclear bomb, and then we're trying to piece the government and society back together, but we're making all of the same mistakes. And it's not that, but it is about those things. We are still making all the same mistakes. And so in the far-flung future of last year, 2019, we see the government continuing to there's a general guy, a colonel, I think, who goes around and tries to find people with ESP abilities, and he's trying to recreate Akira's power, and he feels like that is the right thing to do. It's like doing the wrong things for the right reasons. He knows it's dangerous. He is terrified that the same thing is going to happen again. He is weirdly kind of sympathetic. I mean, he ends up being completely wrong, and like not having enough humility, and he's all about kind of human hubris and thinking that we can play God and control this power, but he also thinks that he has no choice. And so it's a very road to hell is paved with good intentions thing. But he's not just your typical government archetype, like I want power, give me more power. It's a dog chasing its tail, it's chicken and the egg. It's the society is crumbling, and we caused that to start happening, but by trying to amass more power. But now that we have this kind of escalation where you have all this, again, civil unrest, we don't know how to control the populace without trying to amass more power, so what do you do? And clearly, this is a cautionary tale, and the answer is not what this guy does. But anyway, so like I said, you've got a biker gang, and one of the members of the gang is Tetsuo, and he stumbles upon a kid that has been experimented on that has these almost Akira level powers, and all these kids that the government have experimented on look sickly and almost elderly. They look almost like space aliens, and they've been experimented on for a long time. They've been using their powers for too long, and so it has made them decrepit and weird and messed up their bodies. And in this incident, the Colonel guy realizes that Tetsuo has ESP powers, and he wants to experiment on him, so he does. And throughout the course of the movie, he has kind of a where no man has gone before kind of thing, that Star Trek the original series episode, where you have a guy who, and actually it is ESP2, where he goes through a spatial anomaly and it gives him superpowers, and he gets the absolute power that corrupts him absolutely. And that's what happens here. I feel really remiss now. It's going to be cringy if I ever go back and look at my old Chronicle review on Superhero Rewind, because I absolutely should have talked about this movie there. That this looks like it must have been an influence on that. You have a kid who, like all teenagers his age, and especially these kind of juvenile delinquents, who hasn't entirely found himself and figured himself out yet, and loves having these powers. And I guess it's also kind of a Charlie X thing. Early Star Trek original series episodes were dealing with this idea a lot. And anyway, he, just like the kid in Chronicle, he ends up being completely corrupted and seeing himself as unto a god, and won't stop using these powers that he is not ready for, and sees himself as better than his friends, and kind of throws his friends away and even murders some of them. And it's absolutely chilling. It's really horrifying, and he is not as fleshed out and interesting, I don't think, as the kid from Chronicle. At first, early on, I found it difficult to keep all the kids straight. They didn't seem to have really unique character traits. They seemed to all be kind of the same characters until different things happen to them throughout the movie. And then at the end, there is a clear divide, and it's not really an ideology thing so much as Kaneda is the good guy and Tetsuo's the bad guy. I found myself kind of wondering if Kaneda had ESP powers and this had happened to him, if he'd been experimented on. And now I'm reminded of Logan. I mean, like, this movie is everywhere. I found myself wondering if the same thing might have happened to him. I mean, he's also a hothead. I guess they're a little bit different in that he sees himself as the leader, and Kaneda doesn't seem to have those kinds of aspirations until he gets powers, and then he's like, "How come you've been bossing me around all this time?" And anyway, but I did kind of, I don't know, they seem similar enough that I found myself wondering if the same thing had happened to Kaneda, would he have also gone this horrifying, evil god direction? But he's sympathetic in that he is a kid, and it's really sad that this has happened to him, and you can understand how he's easily corrupted by this power and doesn't know how to handle it. There's a lot of really freaky imagery in this movie that will haunt me until the day I die. I'm glad I finally saw this. There's this bit, especially with a giant teddy bear, that just absolutely freaked me out. This movie's really good at making you guess at reality. It isn't the Matrix thing where it's about what is real and what is not, although there is a metaphysical component to it. There's some talk toward the end that I'm not totally sure how to read and what exactly it's getting at. I'll have to look at it a second time eventually, but the ending, there were some question marks with the end of this, but there's some talk about, like, the beginning of the universe, and it gets really big and epic, and I don't really know what it's getting at there, but yeah, a lot of metaphysical stuff. But anyway, there are places where it keeps me guessing, where I'm supposed to wonder if what I'm looking at is a hallucination or if it's actually real. And the giant teddy bear thing I assumed must have been a hallucination. And we know that Tetsuo is hallucinating some as soon as he starts getting experimented on. And then it turns out, as far as I understand it, that was either the creepy alien-looking, sickly, big head Esper kids actually creating that, or they were there and they were just doing that with their minds. Maybe that's what it was. That must be what it was. The way it's visualized, it looks like they actually somehow created a big giant teddy bear. But they also have telekinesis. Like, they can do pretty much anything with their minds. It's a lot of TK, it's a lot of telepathy, and so I'm not sure which of those things it is, but it's not just a straight up hallucination. They are definitely causing it, whatever that actually is. But that was absolutely horrifying. And then, like I said, there's a lot of body horror stuff at the end. This movie is when Tetsuo starts to transform into a big, hideous, inhuman blob thing. And like I said, that was unlike anything I've ever seen before, and it's 30 years old. I mean, it's pretty impressive. It's a really violent movie. It's a really brutal movie. I think it absolutely needs to be that in order to make the case it's making. I said that this is kind of a companion piece in my mind now to Ghost in the Shell. That's not just because both of those are like two of the most popular animes that are set in the future and sci-fi things and are cyberpunk things. Ghost in the Shell was very much about human condition, what makes a man. This seems to be more about, I mean, there's human condition stuff in it, certainly. It's science fiction, but it seems to be as also maybe more about human potential and where we're going and where we could be going, and whether we're ready for some of what we're attempting now. It's about humility versus hubris. And I also see Ghost in the Shell as more of an existential thing, and this is, again, more of a metaphysical thing. So while Ghost in the Shell is exploring what a person is, this is exploring more of what humanity as a whole can be and what we should be. And it basically creates an allegory, in my mind, this is my read on it, out of childhood. And so our main protagonists are kids that don't understand the world they live in. Importantly, they're not really interested in the politics of this world. They just want to be free. They just want to live in it. They're just they're just, you know, kind of damn the system kids. And they're wayward, and they don't have any adult guidance and adult supervision. I think that's important in what happens to Tetsuo. That these kids don't have any parents. There's nobody there to you know, mentor them. And I think the idea is supposed to be that just like Tetsuo as a child is not at all ready to be a god and to try to control these godlike powers, and Akira wasn't either. Humanity on the whole is not ready to play God. We're not there yet. And the ESP is human potential. Someday we'll get there. Someday these powers will be a good thing for us to have and useful to us and useful to the greater good and the greater whole, to the environment, to the universe at large. But right now, we're still petty and we're still feeble and we're still a relatively young species, and if we try to harness that power too quickly, first of all, we're doing it for the wrong reasons. We're just doing it for self-protection or for dominance, and that's and that's going to be our undoing. And so it's not just about having your heart in the right place. It's also about natural evolution. ESP in this is is portrayed as a natural thing that some people are born with, and because that's natural, it's of course okay to some degree use it and explore it, but you have to do that in the natural course of evolution and nature, and not try to force it, not try to become something that you are not yet. And I think that's kind of what the movie is saying. I think that's kind of the allegory, and it was certainly a really violent time in urban America and in urban Japan, and it was in like you see in the history like how we get to all of this, and a lot of fears of over-reliance on technology, of course, and that's where, you know, cyberpunk comes from in the first place, and there's still kind of some Cold War stuff here, despite the fact that we're not actually dealing with a bomb like I thought we were in the first place. You can still see a lot of that inspiration from fears of another country dropping a nuclear weapon on us. Again, you've got that escalation. Well, we have to be as powerful as possible. We have to harness this ESP, what we see as kind of a supernatural power, so that we're ready if somebody else does. It's self-defense. So there's also certainly an allegory there for nuclear warfare. Like I said, when you get to the end, I'm not completely sure what's going on. I understand that, and there are a couple plot points that I didn't quite get until I looked at a plot synopsis, so I think this movie gets pretty cryptic, and it's a little bit difficult to tell what's going on sometimes. I guess I'll throw that criticism at it. And I've had that with other animes too. I think Ghost in the Shell has that to some degree, but this even more so. Like I said, all that talk about like the beginning of the universe and stuff, I don't really know what it's getting at. I get that Akira comes out at the end. He's in all these different tubes, so he's been preserved, but he's not a whole person anymore. He's still got his brainstem, and his brain still works, and so the Esper kids help bring him back, and he sucks the big blob version now of Tetsuo into another dimension, and watching the movie, I could not tell that that's what was going on. I didn't know if we had like completely remade the universe somehow. I didn't know what was going on, so I did admittedly have to read a plot synopsis in order to understand that, but we do completely destroy again Neo Tokyo, and the idea seems to be that this is the inevitability if we try to advance too fast. I don't think it's anti-technology. I don't think it's saying that that like mankind trying to have any progress for themselves and trying to be more than the sum of our parts makes us unnatural and bad. It's about again, some of it is about motivation, and some of it is all things have a time and a place, and we're just not ready for it yet. And that's you know, a message that, again, a whole lot of science fiction films have had after this. I think this is one of the more effective of them. This is, of course, in absolute landmark film. It's a really important thing, but it's also really good. You know, there's a lot of important movies that I go back and look at, and I'm like, well, this is kind of boring. Like, I see why this matters and why it caught on and why we kept doing things with it, but like, it's not entertaining. I don't want to watch this. This is an entertaining film. It is also really super disturbing. I think I'll have to be in just the right mood to watch it again, but you know, there is some levity. It's not always my brand of levity, I'll say, because of course, it does that standard anime kind of exaggerating emotions and facial expressions and things, and it feels a little bit unnatural to me in places, but I have to just kind of adjust and remember that this is made by a different culture, and this is what's accepted there, and how they look at things and how they make entertainment. And so I'm more used to that now than I used to be, so it's not as big of a deal. But one of the, obviously one of the coolest things about this is just action sequences and how meticulously put together this animation is. It's on that same level, of course, as Ghost in the Shell, and things like Transformers, the movie. Isn't that also 87? Just all these, RoboCop, all these major movies. No, Transformers is 84, right? 84? 84, 87. I'm forgetting now. But anyway, and it's it just goes without saying, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's extremely highly detailed, a lot of almost photorealistic looking stuff, not in the faces, but in the cityscapes and the landscapes and things. It keeps constantly topping itself. It just gets bigger and bigger and more and more impressive in its action. I expected actually more motorcycle stuff than it does. There's a big giant motorcycle chase at the beginning, and I thought this was going to be kind of like Mad Max, where the whole thing was going to be on wheels, and it isn't that way, really. You've got some more kind of standard hand-to-hand stuff toward the end, and there's a lot of laser fights and things like that, but it's a gorgeous looking movie. I think my favorite thing about this production-wise is the sound design. Not just the soundtrack, which is haunting and creepy, and apparently uses a lot of traditional Japanese stuff that I'm not familiar with, but it makes sense that it had to go back as far as it did. It's also kind of an interesting idea in considering this notion that the human species is relatively young and we're still kids playing at being adults. That whole idea that we're using like ancient traditional Japanese music, but in the grand scheme it's not that old. That's stretching, but I just thought of that. Anyway, but it's not just the music, which again, it gets really super creepy. It's nuts. But also all the places where the sound just lays out, or where we focus on just one sound. So a lot of places where you'll have like an earthquake, and because of telekinetic powers, shaking the earth and knocking everything over, or dropping total streets all apart from each other, and you won't actually hear the sound of the rumbling. You'll just have the soundtrack, or you'll just hear somebody breathing, and it's really super effective, and it feels like almost a survival horror game or something. And it's eerie, and it's, like I said, it's really super effective. So absolute brilliant movie. I definitely want to look at this again. Obviously, all kinds of stuff that I could have talked about. This is a really dense movie. This is a really deep movie, and I did not even scratch the surface, but those are my initial thoughts. So thanks again to Caleb for making me watch this movie. I'm glad I finally did it. I feel a lot more cultured now. And in the meantime, I will see you guys again with another request next week. If you would like to make a request to make me watch something or read something, you can become a patron at the $15 tier. We do that on a rotation basis. And if you want to do just a one-time one, you can also send me an email. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you again next time.